Hey, Darren here with another tutorial. Today we're building a .NET-Core Web API. Last time we were building a React application with a Node.js backend. That is going to be, I'll have a link up here or in the bottom of the video, underneath the video. So if you can check that out, if you haven't yet, got a lot of views on that, a lot more than I thought there would. So thank you so much for checking that one out all the way. Also, this video today, just building a really simple API. If you want to follow the code, I'll have a link to the GitHub underneath the video, just above the comments. And also, if you want to check out the blog post instead of this video, I'll also have a link down to that right above the comments, just below the video. Anyway, okay, so let's go ahead and jump into this. We'll start off by just creating a new project. By the way, I'm using Visual Studio 2019. I believe it's the preview. Microsoft is pushing out new updates to this right now with all the .NET Core 3 stuff coming out, so just download whatever's newest. We're going to, let's see, choose an ASP.NET Core web application, go to next, and let's see, I think I already have something called Test Web API, so we'll just call this Test Web API 2. Okay, cool. Yep, that's fine, throw it in there, create. And okay, so we're just waiting on the project to create. Alright, so it's kind of weird the way that they've changed this from previous versions of Visual Studio, but now we're going to tell it which specific type of web application we're going to make. We're looking for an API, not anything crazy. We're not looking for an MVC app, or I'm not even really sure what the rest of this stuff is. More kind of boilerplate, kind of all things are built in for you. But for now, we'll stick with an API. We're going with .NET Core version 2.2. So we'll leave HTTPS configured, and we will not configure Docker support right now. That is a layer of complexity I want to leave out of this video. Bring that over. Okay, cool. So first things first, let's just go ahead and build it and see what we have. Alright, so waiting on it to build. Alright, so without doing anything, just out of the box, started a new project and went ahead and just click the little green button, or you can press F5 to get it running. We already have a route, and this at this slash, of course, at our local host and our port, HTTPS is turned on, and we have our slash API slash values. We'll see what that is in just a second, and we're already getting data back from our API. Okay, cool, easy, just click buttons, didn't have to code at all, and we have an API. No. Okay. Alright, so let's look at this a little bit. So let's see. What we're actually seeing is data coming back from a controller. So we'll pop open the values controller real quick. Let me see, make sure that that's a little bit bigger, a little bit easier to read. Okay. So what we have going on is that the route that we saw, in fact, I'll just go ahead and open up again. The data that is being returned, these two strings, value 1 and value 2, is coming straight from this method right here. Action result, return IEnumerable of string, and it's just a simple get, and you see we're returning value 1 and value 2, just like this right here. Let's see, there we go. Alright, so what's happening is that we've got a couple of things set up for us. The routing that's already set up is kind of doing some of this magic that's in the background. Essentially, this route, the slash API slash values, is going to go, the slash values is going to go straight to the values controller. Instead of having every single route called, values controller right there in the URL, that's a little bit redundant. So the API is going to automatically just kind of truncate that off of the name for us. So we know that values is going to the values controller. If we had shapes, that would go to like a shapes controller. If we had, I don't know, if we had, say, an iPhone controller, that would, a slash iPhone would go to it, or Android, or really anything. Okay, so then how do we know, and so now that we know what controller or what class we're going to be in, how do we know which method we're going to execute? Well, we see up here that our route just says API slash controller. This seems to cover what we kind of already covered. Well, let's take a look at what we already have in the rest of the class here. Okay, so we have a get with an IEnumerable string. You got an ID this looks like an ID is being passed into this method, but it's also a get. Well, we didn't pass in an ID, and we definitely didn't get this one. We have a post, we didn't do a post request, a put, a delete, we didn't do anything of that. So the only thing that we could have done, because just a regular request defaults to a get, just go straight there. Alright, because the only request that this defaults to is a get request. So we have get, we did not pass in an ID. If we would have passed in an ID, it would have looked like an ID of 1 or an ID of give me value now, something like that. But we didn't. We just passed in /values. So that is the routing that's already set up in the .NET-Core Web API. We didn't have to set that up. That is part of the boilerplate that is done for you by Visual Studio, and that's really kind of the magic of what's going on here. Alright, so enough talking about that. I'm starting to repeat myself. Time to move on. Okay, so what does it look like if we do want to go into this, if we do want to access this ID, or if we want to pass an ID into this other get method? Well, it's still an HTTP get. We're just defining an ID on the route, and it looks like we're just going to get back a regular string. Okay, so let's see what happens. So we'll just do /1, and it looks like, yeah, we just get value. So right now the code that's out of the box, passing in a value looks like it's kind of pointless, because we could pass it 3, we could pass it, well, it defines an int. Let's see what happens when we pass it a non-int. Oh, we get an error. Okay, so we don't need to pass it a character. We need to go back to passing an integer, or a really big integer. Okay, apparently that's too big. Pass it a 2, pass it a 15, pass it a 564. It doesn't matter. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and close it, and let's try to use that ID a little bit. So the first thing that I'm going to do is, instead of just returning I'll still return a string, but instead of just having a plain string right here, I'm going to incorporate the ID into the string response. So I'm going to set up a string interpolation. I'm going to give us a semicolon, and I'm going to access the ID right there. This just prevents you from having to do some kind of more verbose string concatenation. And I will change this to ID, because it's the ID that was passed in. And we'll start that back up. And so now what will happen is that /API/values will still go to this method up here, like as it did before, but now whenever we do / and we actually give it an ID, say 4, we get an ID 4 back. And that's because that ID parameter got passed in via this routing attribute. That's probably not the name of it, but that's kind of what it's being used for, so that's what I'm going to call it, just for simplicity's sake. So that's how we know that an ID matches this method. It gets passed in here, and then from there it gets passed on to here, and then we interpolate our string, and we create the string, and we send it back in a response. Cool. Okay, so that's pretty much out of the box, that's what we get, but for now I'm going to go into a couple other things that aren't quite as boilerplate, and some things that I like to change as soon as I make one of these APIs. Okay, so the other thing that I add, and this is typically when I'm creating these, it's not something that you have to do, but I just want to make sure that I mention it, is I add a little tag up here, produces application JSON. And the reason that I do this is because most of the time when I'm building these web APIs, I'm not returning a simple string or even an array of strings, or only passing in IDs. What I'm doing is I'm actually building objects and doing some sort of processing on the back end, or retrieving them from a database and kind of turning the data into some, whether POCO or plain old C# object. Then I'm returning it that way. And so even though I believe it's a data formatter, again, built in by default, and it's put in there, it's part of the boilerplate code, it'll parse those for you and format them before sending them over to the client, and it'll automatically do that and send them over as an application JSON type, or it'll automatically send JSON to the client. This is just a personal preference. I like to be absolutely explicit about doing that. That way I know that even if I'm sending a just an enumerable or an array of strings, or I'm sending a single string, or if I'm sending a regular object, all the way back. I know that that's going to be, or at least it's supposed to be, formatted as JSON and sent back over. So let me demonstrate that real quick. So let's see, I'll just add a new class. I'm going to throw this in the controllers folder. I don't suggest that you do that, but this is just a proof of concept, so that'll be fine for now. I'm going to call it my object, and I'm just going to, let's see, add a couple strings to it. Public string. Oh, I have to give it a name first. Let's see. Some value. Oh, that's not right. There we go. And let's see, public string some, getting really creative here. Some other value, and okay, cool. All right, so we have an object, and all right, so now we have our object, and I'm going to move this method all around so that it returns a my object. And let's see, some other value. This could be bleh, and some value. There we go. Throw a semicolon on it because this is C#. All right, and let's see what happens. So we'll start up our API. Chrome is starting up. Cool. Okay, so here we go again. API values went straight to this method over here, and we created a new my object, and we sent that back with oh, okay, that's right. We sent that back with our predetermined values, and so you see that that was parsed as JSON, and then parsed as text, and then displayed in the client. Now, if you really want to see how that came back, we can open DevTools, and just to show that this really did come back as JSON, let's see, we'll go over to the Network tab, and we will refresh the page. Whoops. Look at values, look at, where did it come back at? Ah, here it is. Look at the response. Okay, cool. So the response came back. It's the same thing that we see up here. Response headers, application JSON. There you go, just like that. Let's see. Okay, so let me know that. Let's pass, since we have changed our attribute up here to force the controller to produce an application/JSON response. Let's see if we hit this get with an ID parameter, if we hit this get method, and we're essentially only passing a string, but let's see what happens. Let's see if this just simple string gets returned as JSON content, or if it gets returned as just text. Okay, so let's see, I'm just going to tack a value onto here, 1, and it looks like those quotes, looks like that's part of the parsing that is causing this to come back. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, so we sent back an ID of 1, and that was, we created a string over here, so, and that string is being sent back to the client side, or to the client. But if we take a look at the response headers force it to be application JSON. So let's see what happens if we turn that off. It might go back to, so I'm just going to comment that out. It might go back to just text, but we'll see. Okay, so I turned off our produces application JSON attribute. We're going to hit this method down here, just like we did previously, and we're going to see what we get. Cool. Okay. All right. So notice that there's no quotes around the response rendered in the client, so clearly something changed. Oh, I didn't have DevTools open enough. So open it, refresh the page. Here, response headers, text plain. So there you go. That's what the difference is. So the content type on the response headers, whenever we turn on produces application JSON, like I commonly do, but it's not something that you have to do. It forces the response header's content type, or the response header content type, to be switched over to application/JSON. The reason I started doing this was because I was probably doing something wrong, but I ran into something. I was trying to send something back one day, and I was dealing with something trying to send a string back, and I was really struggling with how do I just force this to be sent back as JSON. I had no reason in the application that I was building to send anything other than JSON back, and so I wanted to force absolutely everything to be sent back that way. And like I said, that's typically what I'm dealing with whenever I'm building a new web API or REST API, so that's why that I put that on there. However, I wanted to go across that because a lot of times that's what these APIs are being built for, but that's definitely not something that you must do. Alright, now something else that I change is typically this route attribute up here. By default, it is API / and then the controller is placed inside of brackets. This is so that you can put this same route attribute. You could copy, paste it, create a new controller, put it at the top of that controller, and it would be the same exact thing. And this is what allows us to easily just put values up here behind API / and then the name of the controller. Put that up there, and that's what allows this URL to be routed directly to this controller. The values, we strip off controller, or we just assume that it's there, it goes in here. And then, however, this is the behavior that I typically change. So without anything behind the controller, I kind of went over this before, how do we know which one of these 5 methods to actually execute? How does the routing engine know? How does it know which one? By default, whenever we don't specify anything else and we're just making URL requests, this is an HTTP GET. So what this means is that if you are requesting, or if you have a bunch of different HTTP GETs, you've got here is just your basic GET, and it's just the just right here, the API / values. If you have an ID parameter, it'll go to this one. If we, let's see, if we create another method, the HTTP GET, and I want to call this name. Let's say I want to get a customer name. I'm building a controller for to handle to retrieve customer records or something like that. So I'll just do string because we could be returning anything. In fact, you know what? I'll use our new object. I'll do object name. I will return a my object, and this is a get. Aha. Let's see, we handle this up here. Can we handle this down here? We'll see what happens. And it looks like we can't. Oh, not all code paths return value. Well, I can help you out with that. Hello from get with a name. Not there, but there. Okay. So now I'll fire this back up, and keep in mind API / values still goes here. /ID requires an integer to be passed in, just like, oh, we don't know. Okay. And this is the reason that I typically change that I typically change that route attribute. Ambiguous match exception. I really wanted to demonstrate what happens whenever this sort of thing isn't taken into account for. This sort of thing obviously happens at development time. It's not going to be a runtime error, but this is the sort of thing that I really. My controllers typically have a little bit more verbosity, and there's a little bit more going on. Not more going on, but I would just like my routes to be a little bit more explicit. I like to be verbose when I can, so that it's extra clear when I come back to my code, 6 months, a year, 18, 24 months even, after I've written it, so that I go, oh no, what was I doing again? No, I know exactly what I was doing, exactly why that route was written. Okay. So, I've been demonstrating. Let me just go ahead and do it, and you'll see what it looks like. So get rid of the controller brackets, change this to values. Notice that this is not value, this is values, as that matches. This is a values controller, or maybe you can see it over here. Okay, probably kind of small on the screen. Either way, slash, and we will put the brackets back, and we'll call it an action. Not method, not subroutine, not anything that you think it is. Action, not actions, action. Okay, cool. So the cool thing is that now we are getting around this this ambiguous match exception. But let's see what we have to do, or are we? Let's try it out. Okay, so first things first. No longer does our simple API/values go to this method up here. We have to be a little bit more explicit, which typically I'm building these things behind a front end, so I have a little bit more control over how the routes or how the requests are being made, so that's okay. So let's just do /get. Okay, so we have the same behavior, it's just moved back a section of the URL. So instead of just leaving API/values completely open, we do /values/get completely open. Alright, so let's see what happens when we throw an ID behind the get. Another ambiguous match exception. Okay, well, maybe what we can handle is we can name our methods a little bit better. Is this starting to sound like best practices when you're just doing the rest of your code? Okay, alright. Maybe I won't leave that in. Anyway, so we can rename our methods according to what we're actually doing with them instead of just naming them get. And that'll get rid of this ambiguous match exception. Alright, so stop running the server again. Let's see, we'll call this get with ID because we're not actually doing anything yet. We're just kind of demonstrating get. Let's see, I'll add another instantiation back here. Some other value. Hello with some other value again. And let's see, get, I'll do an annoyingly long method name. Get instantiated my object. Okay. Alright. Run it, and let's close some of these other tabs. Okay, again, API/values does not return anything. We will do just a regular get because that's what we named this. Now keep in mind, doing get/to, it's not even a route anymore. So what we have to do is we have to say get with ID, and we get our functionality back. We can still pass in an integer as an ID, and it still goes in here. We interpolate the string or return the string response. Notice the quotes. It's formatted as application/JSON content type, and that is passed back to the client, and that is rendered as JSON. But that is just a single field with a single value, so hence the lack of brackets. Alright, so let's try the other one. Let's see. Alright, we'll change that, and object name stuff, because I specified an object name but then I didn't use it. And here we go. Okay, so get instantiated my object/stuff, and we put that there, and so we run this method because this is API/values/ really long rest of the request, API/values/action, and then any parameter is tacked on the end of it. And then we aren't using the object name parameter just yet, but we instantiate a my object object, and then we return it. It gets formatted into JSON, and that gets rendered correctly and displays on the client. Okay, so the last little piece of polish here, let's try to use this object name parameter inside the object that we're actually creating. So let's see, I will do another string interpolation. Hello with you know what, just to be fancy, creating. There we go. Alright, so now we're using the object name. It's a string, so we can just throw it straight in here. The rest is the same. Let's run this again. And what do we get? Okay, cool. Creating your stuff. Creating your object name. And pass in the parameter. There we go. All right, cool. So yeah, that is creating a brand new .NET-Core Web API. I believe we're using .NET-Core version 2.2. And there's also just a few changes that I like to put on there. They're not best practices. They're not even things that you have to do. They're just things that I like to do, so I thought that I would throw them in there. Because they have been useful to me in the past. And so use them however you will. Alright, so that's it. Thanks for checking out the tutorial today, guys. Next, I'll probably be tacking on a React application onto this API so that you can start to see how those two things come together. I may run through this a couple of times, building out an API, building out a front end, trying to see how these two things come together. This is a really popular architecture nowadays, especially with smartphones have been out for really getting popular over the past decade or so. A lot of common enterprise software is starting to be built with a microservice architecture, and this type of pattern, building an API, throwing a front end on it, having the two communicate between with just simple requests, this is pretty much the core of how that works. And so that's why I'm starting off these really simple tutorials by going over that, because it's something that regardless of language, regardless of the front end, regardless of how you want to put it together, this is really kind of the core idea that it's built upon. Anyway, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for checking out the tutorial. Please like, comment, subscribe. I'll be sure to try to get these out a lot more consistently going forward. The last video that I did on the Create React app with a Node.js backend, thank you so much for checking that out. That's got over 800 views now, and when I first made that, I didn't think I was going to get 5. I mean, literally 5, not 500, 5 views. So thrilled to see that video getting a good response. Thank you so much. If you have a request for anything that you'd like to see me do, even something I've never done before, please leave a comment and make a request, and I'll try to get it happening. Even if it's something that I don't know how to do and it's a complete fail, maybe I'll throw something on Twitch. I don't know. We'll see what happens. We'll do it together. Thanks again. See you next time.